Forcing and extending, two vital techniques that the scroller or team maker can use in Barbarian Assault to help waves end as quickly as possible. But what are these techniques? How do they work? And how are they performed? This video will explain how both forcing and extending work, how they're related, and how they can be used to your team's advantage. At the end of the video, I'll give a handful of practical examples to help support the ideas. In Barbarian Assault, there are a few timers running in the background from the start of a wave. These timers control when monsters spawn, when the wave can end, and when the call changes. Normally, monsters can spawn and waves can end on a concurrent 6-second timer, and the call changes on a separate 30-second timer. If certain actions are performed by the scroller, the timers can be altered. Two common actions used to do this are opening interfaces and performing animation stalls. All animation stalls can be used to both extend and force. Animations also allow eggs to be duplicated for their full duration. However, interfaces can only be used to force and won't extend calls or duplicate eggs. Forces have to be started before a 6-second interval occurs and will last until the force is broken, delaying both reserved spawns and wave end checks from occurring. This will permanently alter the wave end check times and mob spawn times within that wave. Call extending with an animation must also be performed before the 30-second interval occurs, and will last for the duration of the animation. However, this does not permanently alter future call changes, so they'll continue to occur at 30-second intervals from when the wave started. Note that call changes actually occur one tick after a natural wave end check and spawn timer, so it's possible to have a monster spawn and extend the call using a short animation without affecting wave end checks. This is primarily done on Wave 2 for the 30-second fighter. If you were to extend on the last reserve spawn with a longer animation like a cooking cape emote that continues through the next wave end check, then it would affect future wave end checks. This occurs mostly on Wave 7. Here you can see I cooking cape from 60 to 75.6, which moves the normal wave end check time from 72 to 75.6 at the end of the cape. It's important to remember that since forcing affects wave end checks, it also affects spawns. Make sure that you wait for all of the spawns to come out before you force or extend, unless you're trying to pre-force something such as on Wave 2, or extend a call change like on Wave 5. As the main attacker, you should always be watching the chat to see if there may be a late spawn. In this case, I performed the emote early, which prevented the last healer from spawning until after the animation. The most common interfaces are created by attempting to activate a prayer within a wave, by reading scrawled and translated notes, and by using a GNOME translation book on a scrawled note. The most common animation stalls are skill cape emotes, drinking the Shrink Me Quick potion, scanning with Calm Orb V2, and equipping elemental or mind shields. Keep in mind that some of these items behave differently within a wave than they do outside of one. Also, the Calm Orb and Skill Cape emotes cannot be used while in combat, or if you get damaged by poison in the same tick that you try to start the animation. Let's go over these methods from simplest to most complex and how to apply them. Clicking a prayer within a wave will bring up a single chat interface that can easily be broken by almost anything, including combat, penance deaths, cannon loading, cannon shooting, and call changes. For this reason, they're the most vulnerable form of forcing and generally require combination with animations to be useful. The best time to use only a prayer as a force is when there's only one penance alive, no eggs are being shot, and there isn't a call change coming up. This usually occurs on Wave 2 just before 36 seconds. Combining prayers with animation stalls is a slightly more reliable way to force. Prayers can be used with any of the previously mentioned animations to chain them together for a continual force. If you're using the animation as a means to extend and dupe eggs, the extension and dupe will end when the first animation ends. Animations can be used to bridge together interfaces over penance deaths and other actions that normally break the interface. As long as no actions occur on the tick that the prayer would normally come up, or on ticks after you click the prayer in the animation, then you can continue to force. This means that it's best to click a prayer on the last possible tick of the animation. With experience, different length animations can be chained together with prayers to avoid call changes and penance deaths that would normally break prayer forces. Sometimes only a short length animation force is required, and you won't need to use a prayer at all. In this case, a short shield animation was required for a 1-tick force. Prayers can also be added onto the end of a cape emote if there are still monsters alive that might die shortly after the animation ends. This may not work all the time if someone shoots an egg on the last tick of the animation, or if something dies on the tick the prayer would have come up. With this in mind, it's generally best to have cape emotes end 1 tick after natural poison ticks occur for the best chance of success. This is done most commonly with strength, smithing, and cooking capes and their equivalents. They have lengths of 9, 12, and 15 seconds, but a tick must be added from when you click the emote to when the animation actually starts. This means that clicking one of these emotes on a 3-second interval will have it end 1 tick after a natural poison tick. In addition to skill cape emotes, there's one more useful stall that's primarily used for the blue wave 9 strategy. This is the bank pin stall. By attempting a name change and incorrectly entering your bank pin for the 3rd time, you'll be stalled for 18.6 seconds. The first 2 bank pin attempts should be performed prior to the start of the round, so the full stall is ready to be used within the waves. Also, you'll need to correctly enter your bank pin somewhere after the 3rd attempt, otherwise you'll be locked out for 10 minutes. You can either start the stall right at 60 seconds into the wave for a 78.6 stall end, which can be prayed for later deaths, or you can start it at 58.8 for a 77.4 second stall end, which can be also prayed and stalled again for later deaths. Now let's get into methods of forcing that are less fragile than prayer forcing: book note and double note forcing. These 2 methods of forcing stack 2 chat interfaces in the same tick, so they can only be broken if you get targeted and hit by a ranged attack, such as from the Penance Ranger or Penance Queen. They'll hold a force through call changes, penance deaths, cannon loading, and shooting. These methods involve much more clicking and precise timing to work, so they're much less commonly used. Book noting is a 2-tick cycle of forcing that requires the translation book and scrawled note to work. It's performed by right-clicking the book, using it on the scrawled note, then clicking to read the scrawled note, then performing an action all in the same tick. This can best be used with elemental shields to continually force in a 2-tick cycle, but can technically also be performed by equipping any normal item without an animation in 1-tick cycle. However, this requires 5 clicks in a single tick and can't be reasonably repeated every tick. A book note animation loop ensures that an interface will occur at the end of the animation, essentially guaranteeing a force is possible. It can also be used to force through many monsters that look like they might die on many different ticks with shields. It can also be used prior to a cape animation to cue an interface at the end of the animation. This, of course, adds a tick to the earliest possible time the wave can end, but is a good option for waves where you're not quite certain if everything will be dead by the end of your cape. Keep in mind that the decision to book note force has to be made prior to the animation starting, so in the case of a cooking cape, you have to make the decision at least 15 seconds before you think the wave could possibly end. The final method of forcing, which is slightly easier than book note forcing, is double note forcing. This method requires both the scrawled note from Monkey Madness 2 and the translated note from Monkey Madness 2. The scrawled note can be made after the quest at any time, but the translated note can only be made during the quest and never again if you discard it. For this reason, it's likely the least common method of forcing. Similar to book note forcing, double note forcing requires you to read one note, then read the other note in either order, then equip an item or perform an action in the same tick. The only difference is you don't need to right-click and use one item on another, so it can reasonably be performed with 3 clicks in a 1-tick cycle. This can be combined with any action in the same way that book note forcing can be, so you can queue up an interface to pop up at the end of a shield, shrink, or cape emote. Now let's go over a handful of examples that should really help reinforce the concepts behind forcing and extending. These first 2 clips demonstrate that if you don't start a force before the end of a 6-second interval, it won't work. On wave 2, shrinking for the last fighter at 30 seconds does not affect any wave end checks, so you'll still have to force the last runner death or else the wave will end at 42. In this clip, you can see that I shrink one tick late at exactly 42 seconds and miss the force, so the wave ends at 48 instead. Here I demonstrate that using a manual food on a healer takes an extra tick to kill it. You can see that it appears the healer has 0 health at 42 seconds, but the wave does not end since the death actually registers a tick later. This first wave 5 example, you can see that even though everything dies at 48, the wave didn't end. This is because performing the cape emote from 30 to 39 seconds moved the wave end checks to 39, 45, 51, etc. In order to achieve a 48 end with a cape method, a force must be started before the new wave end check. In this case, I shrink with a prayer just before 45 seconds to perform the proper force. This clip demonstrates the same idea, but with a moving strength cape, which is 2 ticks longer than a moving fletching cape. Instead of the new wave end check being at 45, it's actually at 46.2. I shrink at 45 here, which wouldn't work with a moving fletching cape. You can also see the difference in spawn times between the two emotes. Note that performing a skill cape emote while moving adds a tick to the stall length. This is not true for other animations. Here you can see I'm moving when I start the fletching cape emote, which makes it last exactly 9 seconds. In the case of a 45-second wave 5, no additional forcing is necessary as long as everything dies by 45. Wave 6 can have a lot of variation depending on the healer, but this clip shows that you don't always need to cape or even shrink if the wave goes well. I shield at 59.4 seconds to force a 60.6 second wave end. Here on wave 7 it looked good until the very end when the last healer wasn't quite dead at the end of the cape. I click a prayer on the last tick of the animation to chain a force for its death. Sometimes a wave goes better than you may have thought when you started caping, usually due to good spread. Decisions sometimes have to be made at the last second for how long to extend. In this case, I ante 3 seconds by starting a cape at 57 instead of 54. Of course, there's a fine line between ending an animation late and ending it too early. It's usually safer to have a longer extension to allow for more eggs and food to be used. Short extensions can ruin a wave. In this case, I perform a booknote force before the cape, but everything actually dies in time before the animation ends, so there's a small ante because of it. This next clip demonstrates how useful it is to end an animation after natural poison ticks if you aren't booknote or double note forcing before. The southeast healer dies right at 75 to a natural poison tick, but my cooking cape ends at 75.6, allowing me to open a prey interface to keep a force going for the last healer. These next 2 clips are a little long, but they show the full process of a good bank pin extension on Blue Wave 9. For experienced healers, it's common to have at least a few healers die at 78 seconds. Because of this, you can either bank pin or achievement diary cape to 78.6 to enable a force, or end the extension at 77.4 to also enable a force. Here you can see that, even though my character isn't doing anything, the call is extending. Since there's no animation, it's important to keep track of when you started the stall to know when you should be able to pray to force. Third-party clients give you the ability to use number keys on your keyboard to enter your pin, which allows you to more precisely start the stall. Once again, make sure you remember to set up bank pin stalls before the round, and to also enter your bank pin correctly after you use it. Even though the wave doesn't end when the pennants die before the queen on wave 10, it's still important to force their deaths. This is because the queen can start spawning between 15 and 21 seconds after the last death. Unforced monsters on wave 10 can still ante 6 seconds in the same way as other waves. Here, the force ends at 69, and the message appears 15 seconds later at 84, so the force was successful. Forcing the actual wave end on wave 10 is difficult due to the fact that the queen attacks with ranged. The best method is to perform a pre-force with an animation that will end 6 seconds before you expect the queen to die. Here you see I range cape at 93 when the egg passes to the healer. The cape ends at 99, then the wave actually ends 6 seconds later at the next wave end check. The yellow egg can be forced in a few ways, but there are two that are most common. Technically, only a 1-tick force is required from 5 to 6 ticks after the queen message. This can be achieved by using only one elemental shield. However, it's easier to time with an orb beforehand. Wait 1 tick after the queen message, click the orb, then spam click the shield. A slightly safer method that may also cause late egg spawns is to orb twice in a row exactly when the queen message appears. I hope this video was helpful, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below.